Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to get into the start sits for the running back position, so regular scheduled programming here. And so getting straight into it, the first guy that we're going to talk about here is a pretty obvious start, but I know you're fired up to talk about him, so let's talk about Achane.
Yeah, Achane, this is kind of cheating because you are starting him, but I don't care. Achane is back. If you were patient with him, or if you were one of the people that were lucky enough to buy low on him, you are stoked right now. And last week, he got only 10 rush attempts, but he went for 97 yards in those. I know he had that 47-yarder, which pads his stats, but every time he has the ball in his hands, he's one missed tackle away from housing it. One of the main reasons I'm so bullish on Etienne this week and rest of season is he's very clearly the number 2 receiving option in that offense. I know we talked about this with, Jalen Waddle being a sit this week. And what's a 3-game sample size this season with Tua? Tyreek's had 27 targets, Achane has 22, and Waddle has 15. Last week was no exception, racking up another 6 catches for 50 yards and a score. He would have had an astronomical week if Mostert didn't get those 2 goal line carries. But he gets the Bills this week, who he absolutely destroyed in week 2. I know Mostert was out that game, which led to 29 touches and 26 fantasy points on only 62% of the snaps. And the Bills have allowed a league high 14 fantasy points per game to backfield. So, the stars are aligning. Fire up HN and just be excited that you were patient with him.
Yeah, so the thing I was going to say was the goal line stuff from Mostert, right? I mean, it was interesting to see that Mostert got both rushing touchdowns, and as long as Mostert is healthy, I think that might cap HN in a way that will prevent him from being RB1, but he's a top 5 running back. Like with Tua, you're never even considering benching him at all. That's why I said this one's a little bit like, all right, come on.
I kind of wanted to rank him like I wanted to rank him like 3 this week, and I was like, okay, I know I'm a little bit. I looked at some of the rankings and I saw him at like 10, 11, 12. I was like, that just feels too low. I need to talk about
Who's
this.
got him at 10, 11, or 12? Come on, Buffalo is literally over the last 4 games. Buffalo has been the second worst run defense in the league.
This is why
he is going to light them on fire.
This is why I always appreciate talking to you, because you don't check rankings and you're just like,
no,
what is everyone else thinking? And so when I bring these guys to the forefront, you're like, what are you talking about? They're so good. I'm like, yes, I agree. But other people don't always think they're as high as they should be. So
stoked for seriously ranked 10th on Fantasy Pros?
Yeah, dude. Unless they've updated it today. I checked it yesterday.
And they even do PPR, probably not even half PPR rankings. Are you looking at half PPR rankings?
This is half, and he's still at 10.
I don't get it. Maybe it's because of the scores. Maybe they pulled him down. That shouldn't be holding him down. He is awesome. Get him in your lineups. And I'd play him over Derrick Henry this week. So that's where I'm at. I think he's just unbelievably good. All right, so going into my start, this is more of a start to sit decision player. So not as fun or explosive to talk about as HN probably, but it's Chase Brown. So overall, it's ever since his game in week 4 against Carolina where he had 80 and 2 touchdowns, he's kind of taken over as the lead back on the ground. He hasn't topped 15 carries, but he's been very consistent, averaging 3 targets a game as well since week 3. And so I just think against the Raiders, he's in a very good spot to succeed here. The Bengals should be ahead. The Bengals should be able to manage this game. I know the Raiders just held Kareem Hunt down on the ground, but I think that has more to do with Kareem Hunt starting to break down because they are giving him 25 plus touches a week until Pacheco is back. But I really like Chase Brown. I feel like it's a good matchup. He's going to be out there. He's going to get his targets. He has multiple opportunities to score in this one. And so I think Chase Brown is a start this week. You might see him around 20 in rankings or something like that. But I do think he's somebody that should be in your starting lineups as at least a flex.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about Kareem Hunt, right? And not being that great necessarily against the Raiders. And one thing the Raiders do allow on the ground is explosive run plays. They've allowed the 4th most explosive run plays over the last 3 weeks, and that is not Kareem Hunt's game, but that is Chase Brown's game. So I think we're looking at potentially a big breakout here. And he's someone that I would try to be trading for today before this happens, depending on what your lineup looks like. But you mentioned he's taken over from Zach Moss. Anytime they're in a neutral or positive game script, it is the Chase Brown show. I know Moss is still in there, when they're trailing, things like that. But I would expect more positive game scripts rest of season than negative ones for the Bengals. So I really like Brown going forward. And I was one of the few that was kind of more on Team Moss to start the season. And it looked like that in the beginning, but that's over.
Yeah, it changed about a month in, and maybe that should have been our call, right? They signed the veteran. They're not sure what they have in Brown as a potential lead back. They see it for the first time in week 4 and he takes over, right? Like that kind of made sense in terms of how it was setting up. So, like you mentioned though, with Moss, right? Obviously Moss is still going to be involved, right? He's still going to get his 6 to 10 carries, and he's still going to be the third down back, probably get 4 or 5 targets. So, this still isn't solely Chase Brown's backfield, but I do think he's going to score this week. I do think he has a good matchup and gets more than enough work to be successful. Your second start this week, another cheater entry as far as I'm concerned, is Aaron Jones, another top 7-8 back pretty much on a weekly basis at this point now. So what do you got for us on Aaron Jones?
Yeah, man. I think Aaron Jones, he's been solid and consistent all year, right? Like other than that week 5 game where he left with injury, he only has one other game with single digit fantasy points. He's coming off a decent game against the Rams. It's funny watching that game. I thought he was going to rack up a lot more points than he actually did. I think he finished around 10, but looking at the eye test, he looked really good. And he gets Indy this week, and he's allowed over 23 fantasy points per game to opposing backfields. Obviously, this is Aaron Jones' backfield, right? Like he was on the field 92% of the snaps last week in a competitive game against the Rams. I think this game should be pretty competitive now that we have confirmation that Joe Flacco is starting. And I would say as like a side note for the Vikings, I think it was a great move for them, after they lost Christian Darrisaw at left tackle, to just make a move and get Cam Robinson in there, because they're seeing this year as like a potential to make a deep playoff run with how good they've looked. They've lost a couple games and they plugged that hole right away. So bullish on Jones. And, he was one of the guys too, like we mentioned in the offseason, very similarly to like James Conner. We were like, hey, draft these guys in the middle rounds of your super flex leagues. If they stay healthy, like these guys are going to outperform their ADP, and both have stayed healthy. I know, Jones got banged up in that one game, but like, this is kind of what we had talked about.
Yeah, for sure. And, Aaron Jones, I was much higher on Aaron Jones than I was on James Conner in the preseason. Not only did I have more faith he could stay healthy, but I also thought he's just a better player. And with the passing game role that he consistently has, I don't know. I just think Aaron Jones is wildly underrated just in general. You go look up his career stats. He's one of the best running backs that we've had in the league over the last 8 years. Really like Aaron Jones, of course, right? And hopefully he's a little bit more efficient on the ground, because he was pretty disappointing last week. He had 19 carries for 58 yards. It was like, dude, are you going to pop one? I think he had a long run called back on a penalty too. It
must have been, yeah.
But overall, still, you see the floor at 10 pretty much, right? Like you said, one other game other than the one he got hurt. And he got hurt in the first quarter, and he already had like 5 points in that game. So it's like, that's not a real depiction of what he is. So obviously love Aaron Jones. And do you think in the passing game that TJ Hawkinson coming back is going to affect him at all?
Nah, it's not something that I would worry about. No, I mean, maybe one target, but not really. I just think it's going to elevate the offense even more.
Yeah, it's a fair point. More scoring opportunities for Jones, maybe. And Hawkinson does quite a bit of his damage down the field too. You don't say that about a lot of the tight ends, but he is one that's able to get down the field on the seam quite a bit. So I don't think so either. I think Aaron Jones kind of has a solidified role within the passing game for running backs. I don't think the tight end position and the target share for that area is going to affect him much. My second start this week was not somebody I thought I was going to be talking about coming into the week, because I thought Jonathan Brooks was going to look more like he's fully back. But my start this week is going to be Chuba Hubbard. So Jonathan Brooks is going to be activated from PUP, but there was some discussion, despite the full practice so far, that he might not be activated for this game in week 9, and that they might wait until week 10 to activate him. Or to like make him active on game day, right? They'll activate him from PUP, but he'll be out for this week 9 matchup. If that happens, you need to start Chuba Hubbard. He's going to be a top 10 play at running back because he's playing against the Saints. The Saints over the last 4 weeks are the second worst are the worst defense against running backs, right? They are terrible recently, and Carolina and the Bills right there with them against running backs. So you have to make sure that Chuba Hubbard is fired up just because of this matchup. I know over the last 2 weeks he has been not nearly as good as he was before that, but I do think touchdown coming here, very efficient game on the ground coming here. And if he does get a couple more targets in this game as well, right, that could even just elevate him higher. I do think he finishes the week around 90 yards, a touchdown, and 20 through the air, so 110 total yards and a touchdown coming here from Chuba Hubbard against the Saints.
Yeah, the Saints have allowed 16 explosive runs over the last 3 weeks, which is the worst in the league. So I like Hubbard a lot. I will be interested. I'm trying to follow the Jonathan Brooks stuff, see if he plays, but if he doesn't, like you said, obviously fire him up. But I think even if he does, he'll be on a pitch count. And in this matchup, like, I don't know, I might just continue to ride Hubbard. And honestly, I'm curious what your thoughts. I haven't seen anything about this, but like, do you think that they would just trade Hubbard? Like, just have him play the whole game, have him look great, trade him to like the Cowboys or something after this? Have you heard anything about that?
I have. I mean, I feel like there's trade rumors around Chuba right now, and
Okay,
I feel like there's a lot of trade rumors around the Panthers, so it's like really hard to judge kind of what they're going to do.
fair.
Because there's been trade rumors around Bryce Young, there's been trade rumors around Adam Thielen, there's been trade rumors around Chuba Hubbard. There's been, a lot swirling out there from this team, and they've come out and said that we're not in fire sale mode. They've come out and poured some cold water on Chuba getting traded and on Bryce Young getting traded. I don't understand why they wouldn't trade Chuba Hubbard. If they could get anything for him, if they could get similar compensation that they got to Deontay Johnson, I don't know why they wouldn't do that, especially to a team like the Cowboys, the Chargers, somebody that needs improved running back depth. It just seems like if they can get something done with a pick swap and move him, that they should. And looking forward, especially into next year, it's going to be Jonathan Brooks, so they could have Miles Sanders, who they're paying a lot of money, kind of step up into maybe a bigger role until Brooks is fully ready. And it just seems like they could make that work, especially since they're not going anywhere this year. So to me, Chuba, if they could get anything for him, they should be trading him. But I'm just not sure that's going to happen if they're taking the approach of we're not in fire sale mode. Moving over to our sits now. So we have 4 sits that we're going to go over here, kicked off by Nick Chubb.
Yeah, so I'm kind of keeping the theme going of this is kind of my no fun week. But I will say, like, Chubb's playing time is creeping up, like 36% his first week back, 61% last week. He had 16 carries for 52 yards, and that was against a stout Ravens run defense. But this week, he gets another really tough matchup against the Chargers. The Chargers have only allowed 1 rushing touchdown to opposing running backs. They've also only allowed 1 passing touchdown to opposing running backs, which isn't Chubb's calling car anyway, though. So I just think in this matchup, he's still, if he's still on somewhat of a limited snap count against a tough defense, I don't know. Like, I could see him getting into that like 60-ish yard range. And if he doesn't get into the end zone, being like a little bit of a disappointment. But at the same time, like, I get it. If you've been patient with Chubb, you don't have better options, and he's your guy you're excited about, like, by all means, fire him up. But I'm just sort of sitting him if I can and tempering expectations with him.
Rather play anybody else.
Okay, not anyone.
Pretty much. Rather play Alexander Madison, play Bigsby, play Etienne, play Williams, Bucky Irving. Like, I don't think there's running backs that are like actually in consideration to be playing. Probably against Vegas, even play Zach Moss over. I just am very, like you said, the matchup's very difficult, and he doesn't look explosive, right? He's working his way back. They do have a bye week in week 10. I think that's going to help him a ton. He's got his footing underneath him. He's going to get a week to continue to heal up, get stronger, but also maybe get more integrated into the passing game, or they kind of build the offense maybe a little bit more around him. Maybe he can get some dump offs from Winston, but he hasn't gotten anything in the passing game. So if he doesn't score, which with Winston, it's not really a rushing attack. He wants to try and air it out.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in Chubb. I can't believe I'm even saying that, right? I mean, it seems weird to be saying that, but that's kind of my reservations about drafting these guys that are coming in with long-term injuries at the beginning of the year. I guess I did it with Jonathan Brooks, but with Nick Chubb, I was always kind of weary. I was very in on Ford. He can get you off to a hard start. You can get your roster set up and then, get rid of him when Chubb is back. But I don't know. I'm not hot on Chubb either. So I thought that was a good call to sit him. And one of the guys I did say that I'd play over him, but I'd still be sitting is Travis Etienne. So he'll be back this week from his hamstring injury. Doug Peterson said it's great to have him back out there, but going up against the Eagles, one of the toughest run defenses in the league, and with Bigsby taking a majority of the rushing game work, I just don't think that there's a lot here for Etienne. I will say, for a positive for him, if you are thinking about starting him, the wide receiver core for the Jags is just so beat up. Brian Thomas Jr. might not play. Kirk out for the season, and Gabe Davis might not play either. Even if Gabe Davis does play, he's not the greatest, and he's banged up. So it's like Engram and then Etienne could have a huge role in the passing game, but I could still see a situation where he gets 10 yards rushing, and then it's like 5 for 40 receiving, no scores, and all of a sudden you're looking at not that good of a week, like less than 10 points. So even in a game where he has a lot of receiving work, so I'm out on Etienne this week.
Yeah, I mean, that was really the only thing that I was going to add is he should see an increase in targets, but I think as far as like rushing goes, like this is Bigsby's backfield. He's been playing great. I think, Etienne might get like the start in a sense in the first handoff in like not a ceremonial way because, he's still a good player. But I think overall we're going to see a lot more rush attempts out of Bigsby, and, he can rip off a decent one and score, but it's like, am I really counting on the number 2 running back on a bad team in my starting lineups? Like, it's just, that's where I'm hesitating here with him. So I agree.
All right, moving down to your second sit here is Raheem Mostert.
I mean, this coincides with the Achane start of the week. And if you have Mostert and you just look at his fantasy points from last week, you're going to be like, let's go, 15.5 fantasy points. We're back to where we were last year. But he did this on 19 rush yards, which again is just so frustrating.
Maybe not last year, but yeah.
Well, like he just getting his touchdowns.
Weekly was his last year.
Last year
was so many touchdowns.
Last year was awesome, but I don't know, man. Like if he doesn't get into the end zone, I don't see any upside whatsoever. I looked at his over under like on his pickup line. It's 32.5 yards. So I'm like, am I really gonna roll this guy out here and hope he gets a goal line carry? Which I mean, he very well could, right? But I'm not banking on that. Absolutely not.
Yeah. No, I get it. And, against Buffalo, it just seems like if he does get, 10 carries, that he could turn that into 50 or 60 in a score. So, like, if you're in a pinch, right, this is a good matchup. It's just he's going to get overshadowed by Achane. All right, so moving on to my last sit, it's Javonte Williams. We talked about him last week. Going into a good matchup against Carolina, we were urging you to sell him before that game as a good matchup, right? And if you played him, you were very disappointed. Only at 7 points against Carolina. I just can't even believe after he looked so good against New Orleans that he came out and completely flopped against Carolina. So, and this was interesting because he got 17 carries and 4 catches, but it was Jaleel McLaughlin that got the touchdown and was playing a little bit more than we had seen in the past couple of weeks anyways. So, I don't know if that's going to play in here, but you can't start Javonte these next 2 weeks against Baltimore and Kansas City. It's the matchup here that's predominantly the reason to sit him. If you're looking for flex help, play literally any wide receiver over him. And, if you're stuck at RB2, and he's like your guy at RB2, try to make some sort of move this week, I would say, just try and get anybody else in there if you can. Maybe Devin Singletary got cut in your leagues and Tyrone Tracy misses, and you can put him into your starting lineup instead of Javonte this week, something like that. But yeah, I'm not in on Javonte this week.
Yeah, the sell window has closed. I mean, we went on a long rant last week saying sell him last week, and even in the perspective, we were like, do right by your league mate, give him him going into a good matchup, and he flopped in this matchup. Now he gets the Ravens and the Chiefs the next 2 weeks. And I got into a couple of YouTube comment battles with some people that were like, no, I'm going to sell him next week. And I was like, no one's going to buy that, even off a good week. And now he has a bad week and it's just not going to work. So if you didn't listen and you trying now, like, I'm sorry, you didn't listen, but hopefully you did last week, but the window's closed.
Yeah. And like, that was kind of what we said, right? Is if sell him going into the good matchup off a good week. Because if he has a bad week, he's going to be worth nothing. You said that specifically last week in our video. And he had a bad week, and so now he's worth nothing on the trade market. You're not getting anything for him as a solo player. So, and you don't feel good about starting him on top of that. So it's just like this weird thing where you're going to have to wait a month now to play him, or wait 3 weeks to play him. So, all right, let's move into sleepers now. So your sleeper for the week is Rico Dowdle. I thought this was an interesting call. What do you got for us on Dowdle?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Cowboys absolutely need Dowdle to step up, right? Like I thought maybe they would trade for someone like Hubbard or Singletary, but here we are with, Dowdle. And unfortunately he missed last week's game with an illness, and Zeke led the team with 34 rush yards. Like I understand this. Yeah. Like I understand this is a pass first offense, but you need at least somewhat of a balanced attack. And like I mentioned, he's off the injury report. He faces the Falcons this week. It's the highest over-under of the week. Atlanta does give up explosive rush plays. Like he's been involved in the passing game as well. And we've also seen him be good against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are a much better defense. And in that game, he got 22 touches, scored 18.5 half PPR points. So let's just try to get Dowdle established in this one and have a balanced approach, because like they can't do anything with the rush attack. Like last week was just, it was horrible. And I was surprised that Dowdle was like below Mostert in the rankings. I thought he would have been higher than this. Again, just kind of referencing Fantasy Pros, so I know you love him dearly. But yeah, I like him this week, and I've been holding on to him, and I've got a league where I'm starting him.
Yeah, I get it. Right. But my reservation on Dowdle has been like, we saw that good game against Pittsburgh, and then Zeke complained, and then they barely played Dowdle the next week. Like, I don't get that at all. Like when Zeke complained, I thought that they should have benched him and or cut him. They have Dalvin Cook, who is basically the same thing at this point in their careers. They could make a trade at the deadline. Like a complaining Zeke when he's playing this bad is just like pathetic, in my opinion. I'm sorry.
Okay, but that doesn't hold any weight to me now after Zeke got the start and was atrocious, right? It's like
we'll see. I hope you're right. That's all. That's what I was just saying. Like as a sleeper, it seemed like I'm glad he's a sleeper, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out if they keep Zeke involved, which I hope that is not the case. Obviously,
I don't know. It's weird.
He's so bad. Why is he still on the team?
I don't know what else to say. Like I don't really.
So bad. Just give it to Dowdle.
Like just let him ride off into the sunset. Like he's done well for the Cowboys. They drafted him like 4th overall a long time ago. He was great. Like let's just shake hands and be friends and just
please trade for Chuba Hubbard here. God, that
yeah.
Anyways, going into my sleeper now. So I have Bucky Irving as my sleeper this week. I think this is going to throw some people for a loop because you go look at rankings. I'm sure he's really low because he's going up against Kansas City. But my thing here is that even if he's not super efficient on the ground, right, he can get 3 yards of carry. Say he gets 8-9 carries, right? So he'll be in the 30-yard range on the ground. But we saw him get 7 targets, which was second on the team. And he caught all of them for 40 yards. So, if he's going to be significantly involved in the passing game, they did not trade for a wide receiver this week. So I think it's going to be Bucky Irving as one of the predominant players in the passing game for this team. And against Kansas City, they're going to have to be able to move the ball. They're going to have try and score at least a little bit to try and keep up with what Kansas City can do. And to try and stay ahead of them, especially if they get out to any sort of lead on Kansas City. So I think Bucky is going to be significantly involved there. And so that's why I have him as a sleeper. I wouldn't necessarily play Rachaad White in this game. I don't think. I mean, White also is heavily involved in the passing game too. But I'm just a little bit more worried that he can't give you much on the ground. If he goes back to that like 2 yards per carry, even if he gets 10 carries, maybe he does okay on the ground. But Kansas City is just really tough against running backs on the ground. So, I just think Bucky is maybe in a little bit better position as kind of like the change of pace, more explosive on the ground, and should see a high volume of targets in the passing game.
Yeah, I was thrilled to see him get 7 receptions last week. And one of the reasons, again, not to hype on it, nothing against Rachaad White, like one of the reasons he was on my do not draft list is because I believe so much in Bucky Irving, but I believed in him as a pass catcher as well, just watching him at Oregon. And everyone was like, okay, well, White's the pass catcher. I'm like, well, hang on a second. Like Bucky's really electric in the passing game too. So that was really encouraging to see. And when you first texted me about this being your sleeper, I was like, oh man, did he see that they're playing Kansas City? And then kind of like talked myself into it. But yeah, I don't really care for either of those guys in this game too much unless you have to. And I guess you answered the question I was going to ask of whether or not you would start White or Bucky. But yeah, tough matchup. But they don't really have any receivers right now, right?
Yeah.
Like
And that's
their
the main
leading
point.
receiver.
And also in good matchups, like Bucky's not going to be down in the sleeper area, right? He's more in like the start sit question marks, and like sleeper, he's going to be ranked really low this week because of the matchup. So that's why he kind of fits the bill this week as a sleeper.
Yeah.
All right, moving over to busts now. We got one for each of us. J.K. Dobbins is your bust for the week going up against Cleveland.
Yeah, last week I thought Dobbins was in a smash spot going up against the Saints. We talked about how awful the Saints are at stopping opposing running backs. He did salvage his week by scoring a touchdown, but he only totaled 68 yards on 21 touches. I know those first 2 weeks were just like out of control with efficiency, but it's really dropped ever since then. Yeah, like it's just
one game over 3.5 a carry after.
And so that concerns me quite a bit, because if you can't do that against the Saints, I don't know how you're going to do that against Cleveland, who's much better against the run. They're not like the old school Cleveland of the last few years. That is whatever. I don't love the matchup, right? And I think with Dobbins, like if he doesn't score a touchdown, we could be looking at a 65-yard game, something like that. So I will say, like, I would expect the Chargers to, as a whole, be able to move the ball. So there's a chance they get down to the goal line and they do want to pound them in. And they have given up, touchdowns to running backs at a fairly high clip.
And this is a bust call, right? I mean, you're likely going to be starting Dobbins. He's going to have one of your higher projections on your team. I'd much rather play him over all the guys we talked about as sits. So this is, like you said, maybe 65 yards and he only ends up with 6.5 points. I will say he had 7 targets last week, caught 4 of them. So he's got a little bit of a reception floor there too. So I feel like 8 points, 9 points is probably the very, very bottom of the floor here. 82% of the snaps, he's on the field all the time. So, but I just agree. I think a tough defense, maybe he doesn't score, and you're looking at upper single digit points here.
Yeah.
My bust call for the week is Kareem Hunt. So I mentioned him earlier in his matchup right against the Raiders, and he had 21 carries and only got 59 yards against them. He did score, so obviously he's been very consistent at scoring touchdowns. They give it to him constantly when they get in close. But his efficiency has been horrible this year. I mean, everybody's like, oh, he's been, such a good fantasy player. And it's like, yeah, but it's like 3.7, 3.5, and 2.8 yards per carry. Like, he is breaking down fast. So, Pacheco could not get here soon enough.
Yeah.
With that level of work on the ground, like, you have to start him. Tampa Bay is a pretty solid matchup against running backs too. So, he should be able to score here. This is, again, a bust case, because if he doesn't score, I just don't expect him to get very many receptions, and I don't think he's going to get a ton of yards. Like, I think his absolute max yardage wise is going to be like 75, unless he breaks a long touchdown or something. So in this game, I could see him end up with 65 scoreless yards, kind of similar to what we talked about with Dobbins without the targets and the receptions. So 6.5 is kind of something I could see happening this week.
Yeah, and he looked bad last week. I don't know.
Looked horrible.
He just, like, some things like just don't pass the eye test, and you're like, okay, how long is this going to last? And you sign a guy off the couch, it's like, okay, they're really good week 1 when they're fresh, and then it's like it takes a toll on you. So I kind of view these bust situations very similarly, but I would much rather play J.K. Dobbins just because I think he's got a lot more bounce in his step. But like you mentioned, like if he doesn't get into the end zone, it could be a tough week. But I think he will, because I just think that's just what's going to happen. And I think the guys that started him are going to be like, dude, I told you, he's so good, man. He's unstoppable. Like, I don't even need Pacheco. Like, it's just going to be annoying. But
which if he scores, right, and he continues to put up his however many points, I mean, he's going to have 60 to score, which, that kind of negates kind of what we're talking about here. But the efficiency is clearly falling off. I mean, it was 28 touches in week 5. It was 20 4 touches in week 7, and it was 22 touches last week, and his efficiency has gone like this. So, in his best matchup, was against the Raiders. Well, I guess he played the Saints the week before, so that's a pretty good matchup. But he had a really good matchup against the Raiders.
Cupcake schedules.
Yeah, I mean, it should have been better, right? And it's just not. And I think he's not going to be able to just hold up to this massive workload for very much longer. All right, and with that, thank you guys so much for watching. We look forward to talking to you in the next one.
Later.